Hello, good morning. How are we doing today? Thank you for the host, Tara and Shane. Hey, A-Rocks. Yeah, I'm sorry I missed your stream last night too, Tara. I was asleep in my bed by. But I hope it went well. I will definitely be watching that again. Or watching that back, I mean. I can't watch it again if I haven't watched it the first time. Anyway. Words. It's early. Thank you for shouting out, Shane. Hope you're all doing well. Thank you for being here. It's Monday morning. We only have a third of this book to go, about 50 pages. So we will be reading 6 chapters. 6 chapters left, about 50 pages total, of the book that Danger on Deception Island is based off of. So, I think the levels are okay, but you guys can let me know, as always, if things are not right. Let me take a little sip of my coffee and we'll jump right in. But I appreciate you all being here. Would have started 45. Welcome for joining, little bro. Thank you. I would have been live 45 minutes ago, but I overslept. So, okay. Let me go ahead and jump right in. So in case you guys don't remember or didn't watch it, which is fine either way, the last thing that happened was Nancy, Ned, and George were kayaking in the ocean, and they saw a big eye in the water below them. Okay. Chapter 11. Photographic Evidence. Nancy held her breath as she stared back at the large eye. No one made a sound. For a moment, the fog broke and she could see the source of the sad-sounding whispers and moans. A small whale stared right at her from some sort of holding pool. A whale, Ned said, his voice low. It's a whale. A calf, I think, Nancy said. As she spoke, the whale disappeared beneath the surface. Nancy paddled along the perimeter of the pool, followed by Ned and George. But the barrier seemed endless. We'd better get back, George warned. Katie'll have the Coast Guard out after us. I hate to leave, though, Nancy said. I'm curious about what this pool is exactly. It's against the law for private citizens to capture whales, so this must be some sort of scientific project, but I just want to make sure. I'd love to get another look at that calf. I agree with George. I'm tired and hungry. It's time to give it up for now, Nancy, Ned said. Nancy knew that they were right. She didn't want to worry the others, but she made a promise to herself to find out more about the whale calf and why it was trapped in the holding pool. Nancy, Ned, and George started in the general direction of the shore. The fog made the trip confusing, and Nancy felt disoriented. Finally, they reached some sea stacks near the shore. I don't remember these rocks when we first went out in our kayaks, George called out. We were a little distracted by the sneaker, of course, but still. She skillfully maneuvered her way around the stacks. This part of the shore doesn't look familiar at all, Ned said. Where are we? It's hard to tell in the fog. We're a lot farther north than we were when Jenna was swept out, Nancy said, looking toward shore. Let's go in here anyway. I'm ready to get out of this thing for a while. Even I'm ready, George said. They half paddled, half drifted up to the shore. When their kayaks bumped into the beach, they climbed out of the cockpits and stepped onto the sand. That's what I thought, Nancy said. Look. She pointed to the bluffs in front of them. We're north of where we started. This is that private property. Remember that fence we drove along to get down to the beach? I say we get out of here as fast as we can. Nancy looked out across the ocean. She saw nothing but fog. No sea cave, no holding pool, no whale calf. They drained the water from their kayaks. Then Nancy led Ned and George down the beach as fast as she could. It was a cumbersome hike. Their legs were still a little wobbly from being in the kayaks for so long. Balancing their kayaks and paddles on their shoulders also slowed them down. Nancy kept pushing them faster. She couldn't shake the feeling that they needed to get off this property before the owner saw them, although she knew that was unlikely. By now they were completely enveloped by the fog bank as it headed for the forested hills. They finally ran out of sandy beach and had to cross over large flat rocks, jumping from one to another. At last they came to a metal staircase leading up to the top of the bluff. They hoisted their kayaks up the steps and walked along the edge of the bluff until they came to the fence that ran along the side of the property. Ned went over the fence first, then caught the kayaks and paddles as Nancy and George threw them over. The girls then scaled the fence and they were back on public property again. Gratefully, they ran to the vans. Bess was waiting there, her jacket full of beautiful shells and large hunks of abalone. Abalone? "Where have you been?" she cried when she saw Nancy. "We've been so worried." "You won't believe it," Nancy said, breathless from the fence climbing and the run. "Are Katie and Jenna back yet?" "Been here and gone again," Bess said. "They're looking for you." "They're not going to find much in this fog," Ned said. "I'll go on down the beach and see if I can flag them in." "Good," Nancy said. "We'll stay here in case you guys miss each other. Come back in 15 minutes, no matter what, okay? If they're not back by then, we'll make a new plan. I don't want you guys to keep running back and forth missing each other." "I want to warn you about something," Bess said. "Jenna is still mad at Katie." "You mean because Katie forgot to warn her about the sneaker wave?" George asked, slumping down to sit on the ground next to the van. "That's kind of lame. It was pretty scary, sure, but Jenna wasn't hurt, and Katie did apologize." "Partly that, I think," Bess answered, "but I guess Katie really showed her up in the workout, too." "Sort of adding insult to injury, literally," George said with a shrug. "Exactly," Bess chimed in. "Anyway, Jenna's really burned, and she's barely speaking." "Well, sounds like she's had a pretty bad day so far," Ned said. "I can't really blame her if she's not in the best mood. Be back in 15 or sooner." Nancy, George, and Bess watched him walk a few yards before he disappeared into the fog. While they waited, Nancy and George told Bess about the sea cave, the strange whispering sounds, and the whale calf. "And I missed it," Bess said. "A baby whale right in front of you? Oh, I wish I'd been there." "It was truly cool," George said. "You would have loved it, Bess," Nancy agreed, "but I still wonder what that whale is doing." Nancy's words were cut off by Ned's yells coming through the fog. "I found them," he called. "You found us?" Katie said as they all joined Nancy, Bess, and George. "You three were the missing ones. We knew where we were the whole time, right, Jenna?" "Yeah, right," Jenna muttered. "I'm changing my clothes." She packed up her kayak and gear, then got in her van and closed the door. Nancy and the others took turns using Katie's van to change into jeans and sweaters. When everyone had changed and the gear was all packed, Nancy and Ned went back to Jenna's van. Nancy almost felt as if she should knock, but when they got in, Jenna was her old self. "I'm hungry, aren't you?" she said as Nancy and Ned climbed into the van. "I hope Katie's picked a good place for dinner." Jenna followed Katie back up the drive that ran along the high fence while Nancy and Ned told her about the whale calf. As they pulled out onto the coast road, Nancy took one last look back through the fence to the property beyond. "I've got to find out who owns that land," she thought, "and why they have a baby whale." "So, Nancy, have you come up with any more ideas about who's been giving Katie so much trouble?" Jenna asked as she followed Katie's van down the coast highway. The picture of the whale calf disappeared with a poof from Nancy's mind. Thoughts of Holt Scotto, Andy Jason, and Joan Kim rushed in. She realized she hadn't given Katie's case a thought since Andy Jason had left the driveway that morning. "No," Nancy said, focusing her thoughts. "No, I haven't." After several miles of desolate, undeveloped coastline, they finally drove into a more populated area. Katie pulled her van into the parking lot of a pizza place. Over dinner, the six talked about finding a whale calf in a holding pool. "I can just hardly believe it," Katie said. "It is so against the law to tamper with these whales in any way. Are you sure it wasn't just a large porpoise or a shark or something? I mean, maybe after just coming out of the dark cave and with the fog and everything." "It was definitely a whale," Nancy said. "Maybe there was more than one," Bess wondered. "Do you suppose?" "Actually, there could have been," George pointed out. "We only saw one end of the holding pool. It seemed to go on forever." "Maybe that property belongs to some government agency or an environmental or scientific group of some kind," Jenna said. "Maybe they're doing research or rescuing orphan whales." "I think I'd have heard about that, though," Katie said. "I mean, it's pretty far away from where I live and everything, but I still think I would know about it. Especially since it's whales and all. I'm sort of connected." "Yeah, I suppose you're right," Jenna said. "And besides, I read that even orphaned whales should be left alone if at all possible," Bess reported. "Other members of the group, With whales, the group is called a pod, Katie interjected. Right, Bess said. Well, anyway, other members of the pod will usually adopt and rear them. And you didn't see any buildings on the property? Jenna asked. Nothing that could pass for a lab or an administration or office building? No, but the fog was really thick, Ned pointed out. Nancy, you're so quiet, Bess observed. You've hardly said a thing. What are you thinking? Nancy put down her piece of pizza and declared, I'm going back up there tomorrow morning. Early, when the fog is far out over the ocean. Maybe then I can see what's really going on. Me too, Bess said. I'm going too. I can't wait to see a baby whale. Sounds like fun, Ned said. Sign me up. I'm gonna pass, Katie said. As much as I'd like to go, I've got to have another major workout. I've already lost too much time this week with all that harassment. Katie, we're gonna solve this case, Nancy said. I am gonna find out who's been bothering you, I promise. I just need a few hours tomorrow morning to check out this whale thing. I believe you, Katie said, smiling warmly. I'm sticking with Katie tomorrow, Jenna said with a mock frown. I've got to get back at her for today. George, how about you? Bess asked. Boy, I don't know. Both plans sound great. I think I'll stick with kayaking, though. It was so cool being out there in the surf again. I have an idea, Katie said. Nancy, why don't we take the whale watching boat up there? You can drop Jenna, George, and me off for the kayaking and then take the boat the rest of the way. That's a wonderful idea, Nancy agreed. We'll probably be able to get a better view of everything, the pool and the property, from the boat. While Ned paid the bill, the girls went out to a small shop next door. I'm going to look for a kayak helmet, Jenna said. I can't believe it, but I must have left mine at home. Can't you use the one you borrowed from Katie? Bess asked. Not really, Jenna answered. It's really important to me to use all my own stuff. It's hard to explain. I understand, George said. Athletes don't like to borrow another athlete's gear. They want their own. They're almost superstitious about it. True, Jenna said. After all, she added with a laugh, I'm sure if I had my own helmet today, I'd have beat Katie big time. In your dreams, Katie said, poking her teammate with her elbow. Looks like you're out of luck, Bess said as she looked around the shop. It's mostly jewelry and clothing. All handmade by local artisans, the shopkeeper said, joining them. If you notice the photographs on the wall as you came in, many celebrities have stopped here on their way along the coast and bought our things. Others have heard by word of mouth and placed custom orders. Please feel free to look around and let me know if I can help. She stepped away to greet another customer. Nancy and the others wandered around the shop. As Nancy neared a display case of accessories, her heart skipped a beat. One particular item attracted her with its silvery gleam. It was a navy blue patent leather belt with a silver horse's head buckle, and it was exactly like the buckle that she had tugged from the rocky wall of the sea cave. Ah, you're drawn to one of my personal favorites, I see, the shopkeeper said as she swooped over. There are only 3 of these in existence. The one you're admiring, this one, she lifted her cardigan to show Nancy the one she herself was wearing, and one that I sold recently. The shopkeeper guided Nancy over to the wall of photographs. Let me see, that one was bought by a celebrity. No, there it is. I don't recognize her as anybody, do you? The shopkeeper pointed to a photograph, and Nancy's heart skipped a beat again. The woman in the photo wearing the horse's head belt buckle was Joan Kim. That's the end of chapter 11. I wake up at 4 a.m. Pacific. I just live on the East Coast, though. It's okay. I'm sure your body will eventually adjust, A-Rocks. Catch those kayaks. Hey, Caden. You don't want music from the Roadrunner game during your reading? It's a little distracting. Her helmet probably has lice, too. Are you implying Katie has lice? They were just awful manufacturing mistakes. Thank you for the claps. Music's still okay, right? It's kind of fun using this mug on stream because my little character is just wearing a shirt that matches my green screen all the time. I'm outright saying she do. Oh, okay. That's probably why her boat got destroyed, is because somebody was upset that she had lice. Okay, cool. Thank you. Take one more sip and then we'll jump in to chapter 12. Okay. Chapter 12. The list lengthens. Lengthens. Chapter 12. The list lengthens. Nancy looked closely at the photo. Did you say this woman bought the buckle recently? She asked the shopkeeper. That's right, a couple of weeks ago, I believe. Was she just passing through the area, or does she live around here? Nancy asked as Bess and George wandered over. She could tell by George's gasp that she had also noticed the photograph. She didn't say, the shopkeeper answered. Would you like to see the buckle? I'd be happy to open the case for you. No, thank you, Nancy said. Well, let me know if you change your mind, the shopkeeper said. She moved away to help Jenna with a sweater. Joan Kim, Bess said under her breath. Wearing a buckle like the one Nancy found in the sea cave, George added. The buckle I found, Nancy said. There were only 3 made, and 2 are here in the store. So what's Joan Kim doing in a cave next to a whale holding pool? George asked. Especially when she hates whale watching, Bess pointed out, her eyes wide. Exactly, Nancy said, adding, I can't wait to get back out there tomorrow morning. Ned joined them, and after they filled him in on the photograph, they all left for the drive back to Seabreak. Back at the inn at last, Nancy, Bess, and Ned headed straight for their rooms and a welcome night's sleep. The next morning, Nancy couldn't wait to get started. She was still frustrated with her investigation for Katie and felt as if she'd run up against one dead end or another. She was eager to follow up on the discovery of the whale calf. What was it doing in the holding pool? And what did Joan Kim have to do with it, if anything? After breakfast at Katie's, Nancy decided to call Sheriff Harvey. When she went to Katie's office, Jenna was on the phone. I can't believe you made me wait this long, she heard Jenna say. I told you I was calling long distance. Then there was a pause while Jenna listened. Finally, she spoke again. Are you sure you didn't find my helmet? Well, call me at this number if it turns up. She put down the phone with a sigh and turned to Nancy. I guess I'm in the market for a new helmet, she said, leaving the room. Nancy called the sheriff. I was trying to reach Katie, Sheriff Harvey said, but her line was busy. I have Holt Scotto in my office right now. I'm going to question him about the bicycle accident and the stalking you reported in the Cypress Grove. Do you want to come down and make any further statements? We'll be right there, Nancy said, hanging up the phone and grabbing Ned. There was little traffic on the coast road, so Nancy and Ned arrived at the sheriff's office in record time. He gestured to them to take a seat at a long table. Holt Scotto sat on the other side of the table. Sheriff Harvey began by asking Scotto his whereabouts on the night before last. Scotto hesitated while he seemed to think, and then he said he was out on his boat. The sheriff continued to question him and then told him about being stalked in the Cypress Grove and about Bess's bicycle accident. I suppose they think I did it, Scotto said, flapping his long arm out to point at Ned and Nancy. Well, that's nuts, he said fiercely. I never did any of those things. Did you pile the rocks outside the door of that abandoned lighthouse down the coast? Nancy asked, and barricade my friend and me inside. Scotto looked up quickly, his eyes glaring at Nancy. He sputtered for a few minutes and then declared, Yes, I did, and I'd do it again just the same. He turned to the sheriff. I'd like to file a complaint, he said, against her. He pointed at Nancy again. She was trespassing, he continued. Entering private property and walking around and all. Arrest her. Holt, what are you talking about? Sheriff Harvey said. You mean that lighthouse? Yes, sir, I do. Scotto said, It's for sale, and I'm thinking about buying it. I was down there looking at fishing sites, and I thought that old lighthouse might be a real buy. Then she came butting in, and she tried to lock me in. That's what really happened. She tried to lock me in. She'd been following me all morning. That's exactly the opposite of what happened, Sheriff, Nancy said. As I told you before, he followed us down the coast road. I thought he was going to ram my car. As I recall, he didn't follow you the entire time, Sheriff Harvey stated. No, Nancy said. We turned off just in time and he drove on. Then when we came back to the lighthouse, his car was parked there. So he actually was at the lighthouse first, the sheriff said. See, I told you she was following me, Scotto said. Well, yes, he was, Nancy said, but Bess wanted to see the lighthouse, and Nancy could see this was getting her nowhere and changed her line of attack. Sheriff, if you'll recall, Mr. Scotto had already threatened me once at the inn, so I was naturally on my guard. And you had warned him to stay away from Nancy and the rest of us, Ned pointed out. Then, Nancy continued, we became concerned when someone appeared to be following us down the coast. He's now admitted he was the driver and that he barricaded us in the lighthouse, which is further harassment. The night of the bicycle accident, his car was parked at the diner when we were there, but he wasn't inside. That would have given him opportunity to tamper with the bike in the parking lot. And the bike was definitely tampered with, right, Sheriff? Ned said. The axle was sawn partway through. Sheriff Harvey nodded. I wasn't at the diner that night, Scotto said. I loaned my car to a friend because I was out on my boat. How come we're letting outsiders cause so much trouble, Bradley? He asked the sheriff. I told everybody that Katie Firestone was going to cause trouble with her boat. See? It's happening. You'll have that friend that borrowed your car come down and make a statement, won't you? Sheriff Harvey said, ignoring Scotto's last statement. I'd also like to talk to a few witnesses who can verify that you were fishing that evening. They'll be in today, Scotto promised. Speaking of the diner, Mr. Scotto, Nancy said, I'm curious about something else. Yeah? Scotto muttered, staring down at the table. Do you know Joan Kim? Where does she come from? Nancy asked. How did she end up in Seabreak that night? Did you invite her to talk to the fishermen? Say, who's conducting this investigation anyway? Scotto asked, finally looking up. Just answer her questions, Holt, Sheriff Harvey said. He sounded fed up. I never met her before that night. She lives up north somewhere. She just showed up in town saying she could help Seabreak free of whale watchers. Help keep Seabreak free of whale watchers. His voice raised a pitch or two. Seemed like a good idea to me, he yelled. All right, that's enough, the sheriff said. Do you two have any more questions? He asked Nancy and Ned. Nancy shook her head. All right, then, Sheriff Harvey said. I'd like both you, Holt, and you, Miss Drew, to stay away from each other. You are on opposite sides of a fence here. I want you to think of that fence as a real thing that separates you and keeps you away from each other. Do you understand? He stood up and motioned Holt to leave, adding, Holt, I want you to stay away from Katie, too, and all her friends and anyone else she brings to town. It is none of your business. Scotto left the building, and the sheriff turned back to Nancy and Ned. Her cheeks flushed with irritation, and Nancy nodded at him. I know what you're going to say, she admitted. You have no proof that Holt Scotto is the one causing all the trouble. That's right, Miss Drew. I'll check his alibi for the night before last, but it'll probably be verified by his friends, Ned said. Nancy knew that Ned was disgusted and still suspected Scotto. That's right, the sheriff affirmed. I need some kind of proof, even good circumstantial evidence. We've got next to nothing. Sheriff, while we're here, Nancy said, I've got a couple of questions for you. What do you know about Andy Jason? The whale-watching guy? The sheriff answered. I haven't heard anything negative. Why? Nancy told him about Jason's offers to Katie and how he seemed to have been hanging around a lot lately. If Scotto does prove to be innocent, Jason's my second choice as a suspect. Well, Jason's a real fireball of a businessman, I understand, Sheriff Harvey said, but I haven't heard anything shady. I'll ask around. Good, Nancy said. The second question is about a whale calf. Nancy and Ned told him about the previous day's adventure in the sea cave and about finding the holding pool. I can hardly believe it, Sheriff Harvey said. It sounds strange to me. You might want to contact the Coast Guard. Marine problems are really their jurisdiction. I know what land you're talking about. It used to belong to the Purdy family, but I heard it was sold several months ago. Check with the county assessor's office next door. They might have some information for you. He walked them to the door. Now stay away from Holt Scotto, Miss Drew. He's definitely a hothead, but so far we've no proof he's broken the law. Nancy and Ned thanked the sheriff, then checked in with the county assessor's office. The records there showed the property had been deeded to a corporation with the name of Shore Imports Incorporated. On the ride home, Nancy's thoughts were racing. What if it's Joan Kim, Ned? She asked. You mean causing all the problems? Ned asked in return. Do you think Joan Kim is the one trying to put Katie out of business? She was in the diner to talk about ways to intimidate people who want to conduct whale-watching excursions, Nancy said. She was so excited by the possibility of solving this case, her words tumbled out. No one invited her, she just showed up, Scotto said. If we can believe him, Ned grumbled. Look, every time we try to pin this thing on Scotto, we wind up down a blind alley. I'm not going to give up on him entirely as a suspect, but I'm adding Joan Kim to our list. As far as I'm concerned, at this point, she and Sneaky always seems to be turning up Andy Jason are right up there with Holt Scotto. When they arrived at Katie's, everyone was waiting to hear what had happened. Over lunch, Nancy and Ned filled them in quickly, winding up with Nancy's conclusions. When they'd finished eating, Katie, George, and Jenna began gathering up their kayaking gear, and Ned helped them haul it down the boat. Nancy told them she and Bess would be out in a minute. Then she went to the office to call the Coast Guard and suggested Bess check out Shore Imports Incorporated on the internet. The phone rang before either of them could get started. It was Sheriff Harvey, who reported that Holt Scotto's alibi for the night before last had been confirmed by nearly a dozen people. Nancy called the Coast Guard and left a message about the whale calf. Then Bess booted up the computer to search for Shore Imports Incorporated. It didn't take her long. The information was brief, only the address and contact information. Nancy, look, Bess exclaimed. As Nancy read the screen, her eyes opened wide at the name of the contact. Joan Kim, President. End of chapter 12. Totally reasonable to destroy a boat over that. Hello, Connor Wood. How are you today if you're still here? Hope you're having a good day. Oh! Whoa! I got scared. Woo! Hi, bestie. How are you doing today? Hello. Woo! Oh boy. Thank you for the anonymous 5 bits from an anonymous cheerer. Nancy loves getting into car-related accidents. Just blindly attack Holt, Ned, you hothead. Hi, bestie. How are you doing? Thank you for the claps. Thank you for the jump scare. Hi, Moocher. I'm listening while I do some homework. Well, I hope you're enjoying listening. We have 4 more little chapters to go. Only about 30 pages left. Sipping some coffee. Okay. Can't choose salad to the spring rolls. Oh, you're saying you can't choose between a salad or spring rolls? Honestly, both sound really good right now because I'm kind of hungry. Okay. The salad that would go with the spring rolls. Oh, okay, I see. All of them. Okay. Chapter 13. Another surprise. Nancy felt an electric current shoot through her. All the incidents that she and Katie had been a part of were tumbling around in her brain like jigsaw pieces poured from a box. Bess, this could be the breakthrough I've been looking for, she said. How exactly? Bess asked, printing out the data for Shore Imports Incorporated. If Joan Kim is the one who's been harassing and threatening Katie, and if Joan Kim also owns a property where we discovered a baby whale, then maybe the two situations overlap somehow. I guess so, Bess said. She looked a little confused. But I don't see how, really. It seems to me you need more to put it all together. And we're going to get what we need today, Nancy said. Let's get out to Katie's boat. Nancy and Bess boarded the Ripper and headed up the coast to the area where they had been the day before. Ned was familiar with Katie's boat, and he talked Katie into giving him the wheel. Nancy had piloted similar craft, so Ned gave her instructions on maneuvering this particular one through the sea. On the way, they passed a public fishing pier. It's 1 o'clock, Katie said, looking at her watch. We'll meet you 3 back here at the pier at 5:30, Katie told Nancy. Finally, Katie found an area she decided was perfect for their workout, and she and Jenna and George launched their kayaks from the Ripper. Nancy piloted the boat for the next leg. Gee, everything looks so different from out here, Bess said, gazing at the shoreline. Partly because we're earlier, and there's not much fog yet, Nancy said. It is a much clearer day, Ned agreed. I didn't realize there were so many sea stacks around here. It looks like there are at least a couple big enough to be our sea cave. What if there's more than one cave? How will we know which one was the one we explored? I'm not interested in the cave, Nancy said, turning the boat in toward shore a little. I'm interested in that whale calf, and I suspect there's only one holding pool. I can't believe I'm actually going to see one up close, Bess said, hanging over the deck rail. Are we close, do you think? Ned, will you take the wheel? Nancy asked. I want to use the whale-watching telescope to find our way. Ned took over the piloting, and Nancy and Bess sat down on the green and white striped banquette. It took Nancy a few minutes to adjust the lens, but at last she got a clear view of the seascape ahead and the landscape to their right. Well, we're leaving the populated area, she said, looking toward shore. I think we're close to the property of Shore Imports Incorporated. Bess took a turn looking through the scope. I think I see a wire fence, she said. Nancy swung the scope around to where Bess pointed. That's it, Ned. The fence we climbed yesterday. I remember every step, Ned groaned. He skillfully turned the boat around the sea stacks. A couple of sea otters were sunbathing on the flat top of one rock about the size of the Ripper. Startled, they skittled down a well-worn path into the water. As the boat chugged into the area of sea caves, the shoreline almost disappeared. From the ocean perspective, the rocky formations almost completely concealed the bluffs and landscape from anyone gliding by in a boat. Nancy kept watching through the scope until she finally called out to the others. "There, I think I see it. Ned, let me have the wheel. I think I can get us right to it." Nancy maneuvered the boat around two smaller sea caves until they finally faced an enormous rocky mound with a large opening. "That's it, Nancy," Ned said. "I'm sure of it. That's our cave." "Yep, and around behind it," Nancy said, turning the wheel. "Should be the baby whale," Bess said almost in a whisper. Nancy cut the motor to idle and rounded the sea cave, and there it was, the holding pen. The walls of the pen extended for yards and yards. She steered the boat carefully until they came up to the holding pen. It was perfectly situated among the huge rocks so that it was nearly invisible from shore or from farther out in the ocean. "You know, we're lucky to find this thing," Ned said. "If we didn't know it was here and we were just out cruising, we would have passed right by it." "Listen, Ned," Nancy said, straining to hear. I don't hear anything," Ned said. "I don't either," Bess said. "That's what I mean," Nancy said, disappointed. "No whispers. No moans." "No whale, I'll bet," Ned said, craning over the railing to see into the holding pool. Nancy idled the boat around the oceanside perimeter of the pool. She remembered the treacherous rocks she had kayaked through yesterday to get back to shore. She knew better than to try to take the Ripper through them. "Maybe it's just swimming under the water?" Bess said hopefully. Then she added, I know, they'll have to come up to the surface to breathe." Nancy realized she was holding her breath, hoping the whale calf would surface. With a sigh, she realized that the pool was probably empty. "I don't believe it," Bess said. "It's gone. You guys really did see it, didn't you?" "Yes, we saw it," Ned said, looking into the pool through the telescope. His tone of voice indicated he was disappointed. When they reached the far end of the holding pool, Nancy had to turn back out into the ocean to avoid running into a huge sea stack. The shoreline, with the backdrop of an enormous bluff, curved dramatically out into the water. The metal fence of Shore Imports, Inc. continued along the bluff top. Nancy idled the boat on around the long curve of the land. On the far side of the curve, hidden by the bluff, was a harbor. "Look at that," Bess said, pointing into the harbor. "What is it?" Nancy was stunned to see a huge ship apparently anchored about 500 yards out into the harbor. "It looks like some sort of freighter," she suggested. Cranes and pulleys jutted high into the air from the ship, forming sharp geometric shapes against the fog bank far on the horizon. Nancy looked at the ship, then back at the shore. Because of the rocks in the sea and the enormous bluff, the ship was probably not visible from any road except one on the private property. "I'll bet this is a private harbor for Joan Kim's outfit," Nancy guessed. "I think we need to check out that ship." She increased the speed of the boat and turned it toward the ship. "If anyone stops us, we're just tourists out for some sightseeing. We're just interested in the pretty big ship and wondering what it is." She steered the Ripper around the curve of land and into the harbor. "One of you might want to aim the telescope toward the ship," she suggested, keeping her eye on the boat ahead. "See if you can tell how many people are wandering around on deck. Hey, is anybody listening to me back there? I don't think we'll get on board, but I'd like to know who owns it and—" She felt a searing pain on the back of her head. Her knees felt like melted gelatin, and the blood all seemed to rush from her head. The last thing she heard as she crumpled to the floor was a plaintive, unearthly moan. It's the end of chapter 13. Interested in that calf? Ned got noticeably jealous. Can that calf play 8 football positions at once? Ned was relieved. Now he didn't have to compete for Nancy against a whale. It's just a baby whale. Just a baby. I really like the music from Secret of the Old Clock. Okay, pushing on. Chapter 14, Curious Cargo. The pain in the back of Nancy's head cascaded in waves. It would be just horrible for a few seconds, and then it would get worse. As she regained consciousness, she felt as if her head were full of ocean fog. As wisps would clear away, bits of the world became clearer. She tried to move her hands, but realized they were tied behind her. Her ankles were tied as well. That gave her a jolt of awareness that seemed to clear masses of fog out of her brain. Her eyes opened part way. She heard a rustling next to her and a groan. Opening her eyes wide, she looked toward the sound. The room was dark, but she could still recognize Bess's blonde hair. "Bess," Nancy whispered. "Bess, can you hear me?" "Mm-hmm," Bess mumbled. My wrist hurts." Nancy raised up on one elbow. Just a thin strip of light shone from under a door. Nancy saw that Bess's wrists and ankles were also tied. She had an old red bandana tied around her neck. "It's your sprained wrist, Bess," Nancy said. "Sit up, let me see if I can loosen the rope." Nancy sat up and scooted toward Bess so they were back to back. Then, blindly feeling the bindings around Bess's wrists, Nancy's fingers began picking at the ropes. "It was 2 men," Bess said in a hushed voice. "They just appeared over the railing of the deck." "They must have approached in a raft or rubber boat," Nancy said. "I never heard a thing." "Neither did I or Ned," Bess whispered. "They just overpowered us. Ned put up quite a fight, but they hit him with a wrench. I tried to call out, but one of them had his hand over my mouth." "Did they knock you out too?" Nancy asked as she tugged and poked at Bess's wrist ropes. "No, they tied this smelly old bandana around my mouth as a gag. I kept rubbing my chin against my shoulder, and I managed to work the gag off. I've been trying to wake you up ever since." "Oh," groaned Ned from the corner of the room. "Oh." "Shh." Bess and Nancy both hushed Ned as he began to wake up. "Where are we?" Ned mumbled. "What happened?" "I have a feeling we're on the freighter," Nancy said. "Someone was not happy about our being so close." "So what do we do now?" Ned mumbled, following that with another groan. "Are you okay, Ned?" Nancy asked. "I'll live," Ned said, "but I want a piece of the guys who did this. Let's get out of here and find them." Nancy could hear him thrashing around, probably trying to free himself from his bindings. "Ned," Nancy said, "scoot over here. Between the 3 of us, we ought to get free." Nancy and Ned took turns working on Bess's wrist bindings. Finally, she was out of the ropes. With Bess's one good hand and Ned's 2 tied ones pulling and twisting, Nancy's wrists were finally unbound. They all kept working at the ropes until at last they were all free. Nancy stood. Her legs were sore, but she could feel them getting stronger as she paced. "How's your head?" she asked Ned as he struggled to his feet. "Are you feeling dizzy?" "A little," he answered, "but I'll be okay. I just need to move around a little. I think you're right about where we are. It sure feels like a ship, one that's anchored, not moving forward." "How are you doing, Bess?" Nancy asked her friend. "How's your wrist?" "I'm fine," Bess answered. "Let's get out of here. What kind of place is this? Where are we on this ship? It's so dark in here I can't see a thing." "I know, but we don't dare turn on a light," Nancy said. They were still all talking in low tones, but no longer whispering. "Wherever we are, no one can hear us. If they could, they'd have been here by now. But I'm afraid to turn on a light. They might be able to see that somehow." "Let's not leave these ropes," Nancy suggested. "They may come in handy, and the bandana, too." They each took the ropes that had bound their wrists and ankles and tied them around their waists. Each of Nancy's ropes wound around her twice. "You can have this," Bess said, dangling the corner of the bandana between her thumb and finger. "It smells like a gym sock." Nancy stuffed the smelly bandana in her back pocket, then stepped slowly around in the dark. She walked through taped-up cartons and wooden crates, bound with thin strips of metal, until she found a wall. Then she began feeling her way around it. She finally came to a light switch, but didn't push it up. Next to the switch was a metal door. "Locked, of course," she muttered under her breath. She was wary of speaking out loud near the door in case someone could hear from the other side. She continued her exploratory search around the perimeter of the room. So far there appeared to be no other doors, no windows or portholes. "I think we're in a hold below decks," she reported to the others who'd been doing their own tentative explorations. "Like a room where they keep the freight they're shipping." "The Exports of Shore Imports, Inc., right?" Ned added. "Look for something we can use to get out of here. Anything. Deck supplies, furniture, cleaning equipment." "I found a table or desk," Bess said, "over here. It's stacked with boxes and completely surrounded with crates and cartons." Nancy and Ned followed the sound of Bess's voice. They were standing near a wooden table. "Nothing," Ned said. "No drawer, no packing stuff, no scissors or paper clips, nothing." Now there's something," Nancy said. "My foot's just bumped up against the perfect item." She reached under the table and rolled out a huge coil made up of one long strip of a very thin, narrow metal that had been wound up into a wheel. "What is it?" Bess asked, leaning down to get a better look. It's metal strapping, Ned said. The stuff they wind around cartons to keep them secure, like rope, only stronger. And it's just what we need, Nancy said. The wheel was way too heavy to carry, so she just rolled it across the room to the door. Then she found the end of the coil. It was a flat piece of metal about 1/4 inch wide, and it was perfect for picking a lock. It took Nancy less than a minute to unlock the door. Before she opened it, she looked at her friends. She knew that if they were on the freighter, they were in great danger. They could be held prisoner indefinitely. They could even be taken to another location or another country. Our first goal is to get off this boat, she said. We need to find a raft, a lifeboat, a motor launch, anything that we can use to get to shore. I don't know how long we were knocked out, but it's got to be at least 4 hours. It's got to be at least 4 o'clock, maybe later. That means the fog is close or already in. So a getaway in another craft is a real option because the fog will give us cover. What if someone sees us? Bess asked. Or if we get separated, Ned added. Our second goal is to contact the authorities. If we get separated, we each need to keep trying to find a way off the boat. Whoever makes it needs to call the Coast Guard and get them out here immediately. I left a message for them before we left, so they may already be alerted, but we don't know that for sure. Nancy's thoughts came quickly. It's possible we can even reach them from here, she continued. Watch for phones, computers, anything we can use to communicate with the Coast Guard or someone on shore. Are you ready? Okay, let's go, Ned said. The Three Musketeers, Bess said. Nancy could hear the wariness in her friend's voice. They gave one another high fives, and Nancy opened the door a tiny bit. She peeked cautiously through the narrow opening. Then she opened it wider, then wider still. There was no one in the long corridor. She led the others quietly down the hall. They had only gone a few yards when a tremor of recognition rippled the hair on the back of Nancy's neck. From the end of the corridor came a familiar whisper and soft moan. They reached a set of double doors and cautiously pushed them open. They were on a sort of balcony that extended out over the top of a large 10-foot-high hold that was apparently deep within the ship. At the bottom was a huge pool. Confined in a woven rope hammock submerged in the water was the baby whale. Oh, wow, Bess cried with a gasp. Oh, I feel so sorry for it. They've got it sort of caught up. It looks like it can't swim or anything. But it looks safe, Ned said. It can't injure itself and it's in the water. I don't care, Nancy said as the whale stared up at them and made that eerie sound. It looks really sad and sounds sad. They watched the whale for another moment or two, then Nancy shook her head. We can't stand here. We've got to get out. We're no help to ourselves or that calf as long as we're trapped on this boat. Let's try to get farther up in the ship. They stepped cautiously back into the corridor and ran down the hall. Skipping the elevator because it would make too much noise, they found a staircase and stepped quietly up to the next floor. A quick search of the corridor turned up nothing but locked doors, so they climbed to the next level. From the stairwell, Nancy cracked the door to the corridor the tiniest bit. Pardon me. Nancy cracked the door to the corridor the tiniest bit so she could barely see through the opening with one eye. She heard people talking and immediately recognized one of the voices coming from a room across the hall. It's Joan Kim, Bess whispered behind Nancy. I recognize her voice from when she spoke at the diner. Nancy nodded, keeping the door open a paper-thin crack. A window across the hall revealed a sort of meeting or conference room. 2 men and a woman were listening to Joan Kim. We'll take our usual route, she said. We need to get the cargo to the client as quickly as possible. We'll leave shortly when the fog is densest. What about the prisoners? The other woman asked. We will keep them comfortable and alive as we do our cargo, Joan Kim answered. When we reach our destination, we'll turn them loose and they can fend for themselves. But it's a dangerous country, the other woman pointed out. They could be shot for just being there, or imprisoned. They will no longer be our responsibility at that point, Kim responded. Then she dismissed the others and sat down at a desk in the corner of the room. Nancy could see by the large portholes on the outer wall of the room that they were on the upper deck. The other woman and the 2 men started toward the door of the meeting room, and Nancy eased her stairway door closed. She and Ned held the door shut with all their strength in case any of the people intended to use that door, but Nancy heard the footsteps of the 3 get fainter and fainter as they apparently walked the opposite way down the corridor. Nancy knew that they didn't dare go out into that corridor as long as Joan Kim was in that meeting room. So she led Bess and Ned up the staircase to the next landing. A quick check of that corridor showed it to be empty. Nancy stepped out first and started down the hall. Suddenly she heard a man's voice speaking from right around the corner ahead of her, and he was coming her way. Thinking fast, she tried the first door she came to. It was unlocked. She ducked inside and locked the door behind her. She stood very still in the dark room, barely breathing. Stay in the stairwell, Bess and Ned, she thought, trying to will her friends out of trouble. Don't come into the hallway. She heard at least two sets of footsteps pass by the door. I don't like taking along extra cargo, if you know what I mean, the man said as they passed. I say we get rid of them now. She heard someone unlock another door and open it. Then she heard the footsteps again and the door closed and it was quiet. Where are Bess and Ned? She wondered. Are they still in the stairwell? Did they come out, hear the voice, and duck into another room the way I did? Nancy thought for a moment about what she should do, then decided to try to make a run for it to try to reach her friends, a boat, or a way to call for help. As she reached for the door, she heard the lock turn. Nancy backed into the small room, looking for an escape route, but she could see none. She watched in dismay as the doorknob turned and the door creaked open. The light suddenly shot on, and standing in the doorway was Joan Kim. That's the end of chapter 14. She was knocked upside the head by a whale and tied up by a whale. It was dark, but Nancy could see everything, no prob. Hi, Hammer. Oh, be safe driving, HS. Oh, Hammer sandwiches. Delicious. We should be quiet. Oh, high five. We should probably leave it here. It's fine. Nancy's whale whisper. Hammer sandwich. Hi. Welcome back, HS. I hope you're either done driving or being safe. Welcome back, Arox. Hello, Joan. Rawr. Hi, Mystic. Hello, friends. I am lurking. Hello, Mecca. I hope you enjoy your lurk. Thank you for claps. We have 2 more chapters and we are done. Thank you for shouting out. Mystic. And Mecca. Both deserving. I like this song too. It's a good one. Okay, we're gonna move on. Hope you're having a great day today, Mystic and Mecca. Chapter 15. The Scrap of Evidence. The harsh, bright light made Nancy blink. Adrenaline seemed to electrify her as she stood face to face with Joan Kim. Miss Drew, the tall, attractive woman said. She was dressed in a purple silk jumpsuit and held one hand behind her back. Frowning, she stepped inside the door and shut it behind her. Nancy looked around quickly. They were in a small dining room, perhaps an area used for entertaining clients or guests. There were 3 round tables set with white linen cloths and napkins. In the middle of each table were 2 silver candlesticks and a silver salt and pepper shaker. I had heard you were very skillful, Joan Kim continued. It appears my sources were correct. You've managed to thwart my crew's best efforts to keep your activities restricted. How do you know who I am? Nancy asked. She knew she needed to stall the woman until she could figure out what to do. Behind Kim's shoulder, Nancy saw a window into the hall. The light was so bright in the room she could barely see through the window. Instead, she saw a reflection of the room itself. I have amassed quite a file on Miss Firestone. I know who her friends are and who her enemies are. I have had people try to frighten her into going out of business. I have followed her myself on occasion. I even followed you one evening. Kim's lips stretched into a slim smile. On the bluffs in the cypress groves. That's correct, Joan Kim said with an eager nod. I was in town anyway, preparing for my speech in the diner. When I saw you all file by on your bicycles, I assumed Miss Firestone was with you, so I followed you out onto the bluffs. As Joan Kim talked, Nancy inched to her right. Kim instinctively moved also until she stood partly in front of the window. In the reflection, Nancy got the information she was seeking. Kim held a gun behind her back. Now Nancy knew her only hope was to surprise and incapacitate her at the same time. When I discovered Miss Firestone was not one of the bikers, Joan Kim continued, I changed my plans slightly and chose you as my target. I thought it might give you something to think about. I checked with some of my resources about you, she continued. You have quite a reputation in some places for being a detective. You have proved that today, for here you are. Do you know what the sentence is for kidnapping, Miss Kim? Nancy asked. It's of no interest to me because we will not be here much longer. When we arrive at our destination, you will be released, so there will be no more kidnapping. Where are we going exactly? Nancy asked. Across the Pacific? Kim said in a clipped voice. I have business there. Does this business have anything to do with that whale calf in the pool below? Nancy asked. She could hardly keep the anger out of her voice when she thought of the captive creature. So you took a tour, Kim said. Her eyes flashed at Nancy. Very well, I'll share my plans with you. You can do nothing about them. I have a large and lucrative business. I own ships around the world and capture whale calves to sell to our clients. Isn't it illegal to capture a migrating calf? Nancy asked. She was standing near one of the tables. She shuffled her feet, each shuffle moving her back an inch or two, until she felt the edge of a table against her hip. When she reached back to lean on the table, So what do your clients do with them? Nancy asked, not sure she wanted to hear the answer. It's not my concern, Kim said with an offhand gesture. Some are put in zoos or films or other such attractions. Some are probably eaten. As Joan Kim spoke, Nancy reached back until her fingers closed around one of the salt or pepper shakers. Easing it toward her, she simultaneously began twisting off the top. The lid fell silently onto the tablecloth. Nancy dipped her finger into the shaker. Her heart leapt with an elated rush when she felt the contents. It had a powdery, not a grainy feel. Good, I got the pepper, she thought. She picked up the open pepper shaker and held it carefully up and under the back of her sweater. This is why I am determined to keep whale-watching businesses and the tourists they attract out of my way, Kim continued. So you are the one responsible for all the trouble Katie's been having, Nancy said, pouncing on her opening. Joan Kim looked at Nancy. She didn't seem to notice that Nancy had moved back a foot or two. But she wasn't discouraged, Kim said, and you weren't either. You just kept coming. I should have been far more aggressive out on those bluffs. Then I wouldn't have to deal with you and your friends right now. Where are the other two, by the way? Are you or someone working for you? And you or someone working for you sawed the axle on Bess's bike too, right? Nancy said quickly, trying to keep the woman distracted and talking. And vandalized Katie's boat? The woman seemed taken aback by Nancy's words. Bicycle axle, she repeated. I know nothing about that, and I did nothing to Miss Firestone's boat. I considered it, but someone beat me to it. She took a couple of steps toward Nancy, then stopped. No more questions from you, she said. Only answers. Where are your friends? Did you know I found your horse's head buckle? Nancy said abruptly, hoping to get her captor off guard. Joan Kim's expression softened immediately. My buckle? Where did you find it? It's one of my favorite pieces. Give it back to me now. I found it in the sea cave next to the offshore holding pool, Nancy said. Ah, yes, Kim said with a smile. I sometimes go there for solitude and peace. A few weeks ago, I took an unexpected spill from my canoe. Where's my buckle? Her eyes were open wide with anticipation. Keeping the pepper shaker under her sweater, Nancy pulled her hand around to the front. With both hands under the sweater, she pretended to be unbuckling a belt. Then with one quick, sure gesture, she pulled the shaker out from under her sweater and, leaning forward, dashed the contents in Joan Kim's face. Then Nancy reached back immediately and grabbed a candlestick from the table. What have you done? Her left arm came out from behind her back, but her eyes were clenched tightly against the pepper. Nancy was ready for her, slamming the candlestick into the woman's arm with a solid blow. The gun flew across the room, landing in a soft easy chair in the far corner. Joan Kim doubled over. Her left arm hung limp. Her right hand swiped frantically at the pepper dust on her face. As Nancy grabbed her arms, the woman tried to fight, but she was stunned by the pepper. Tears rippled out from her eyelids and rolled in streaky patterns down the black and gray speckles covering her cheeks. Her nose ran and she tried to yell for help, but with every breath she inhaled more pepper. The only sounds that came out were gagged squeaks and coughing spasms. Within minutes, Nancy had tied Joan Kim to a heavy radiator against the wall. She tied the bandana around her mouth as a gag. She didn't pull it too tight, though, because the woman was still having trouble breathing. Just being around Joan Kim made Nancy's eyes sting, so she held her breath as long as she could and moved quickly. She took the keys from Kim's pocket and then checked the room for a phone. There was none. She slipped the ammunition cartridge out of the gun and into her pocket, left the room, and locked the door. Out in the corridor, Nancy took a few deep breaths and listened for anyone who might be nearby. Hearing nothing, she made her way down the hallway to a door leading to the open deck. She looked through the glass door and saw Ned and Bess at the very far end of the deck. They were standing very still, not talking. In front of them, his back to Nancy, was a man. She could tell by their postures that the man was probably armed. Nancy looked around the deck for something she could use to help her friends. Her eyes stopped on a large metal basket by the railing. Yes, she said under her breath. That's it. She opened the door very slowly. Bess and Ned saw her, but they immediately focused back on the man without giving her away. Nancy heard Ned start a conversation to distract the man. Nancy stepped onto the deck and closed the door silently behind her. She inched over to the metal basket. Inside was an emergency flare gun and cartridges like the ones Katie had given her. She picked up the large flare gun and opened the muzzle. She placed the cartridge inside, pointed the flare gun up, and fired it into the air. With a whistling surge, the flare arched through the fog and exploded its fireworks. When the flare's whistle began, Nancy ducked behind a stack of coiled ropes. The man at the end of the deck whirled around, but Ned butted his head into the man's back and knocked him to the ground. While Nancy set off another flare, Ned knocked the man out with one perfect punch and tied him up. Through the fog, Nancy heard the continuous honking siren of the Coast Guard. Soon she saw the boat coming toward the ship. "Are you two okay?" Nancy asked. "Yeah," Bess answered, "but we were worried about you." "I'm fine," Nancy said, "and you'll be happy to hear that Joan Kim is currently wearing your smelly bandana." "Whoa," Ned said, "you ran into her?" "You could say that," Nancy replied with a smile. "I'll tell you about it later. It looks as if we're about to be rescued." Nancy pointed to the welcome sight of the Coast Guard boat plowing through the fog. Through a speaker, the CG officer ordered the ship's crew to surrender. The few that were still aboard appeared on deck with their hands over their heads. Nancy, Ned, and Bess told their stories to one of the CG officers who boarded the ship. "We received your phone message, Miss Drew," the officer said, "so we were already in the area, checking out the offshore holding pool. We were heading out to inspect the ship when we saw your flare. We would have been here sooner, but we had to stop to pick up the motor launch carrying some of Joan Kim's colleagues who were trying to escape." The door opened onto the deck, and the two other officers brought out Joan Kim and took her to the ladder leading down to the Coast Guard boat. "Kim has a legitimate importing business that we were aware of," the officer told Nancy, "but we sure did not know anything about her illegal sideline. You and your friends are true heroes." "What will happen to the baby whale?" Bess asked. "We'll turn it over to some people who are specialists in whale behavior. They'll determine what's best for the calf. If it's healthy, it may be released now, or it may be held until the adult whales return and be released then." The Coast Guard had picked up Katie's boat and towed it to the ship. When the CG finished questioning them, Nancy and her friends finally headed south toward the fishing pier where Katie, George, and Jenna waited. Ned docked the Ripper, and they all went into a seafood restaurant on the pier for dinner. Nancy, Ned, and Bess regaled the other three with their experiences aboard Joan Kim's boat. "Nancy, I cannot thank you enough for solving this case," Katie said. "I can finally do my cruises and not worry about harassment or worse." "I appreciate your thanks," Nancy said, "but I'm not convinced that this case is totally solved." "What do you mean?" Jenna asked. "Well, we still don't know who trashed the Ripper and who tampered with the bike," Nancy pointed out. "It wasn't Joan Kim?" George asked. "She really didn't seem to know anything about either one," Nancy said. "Then it must be Holt Scotto," Jenna concluded. "Both Kim and Scotto confessed to causing some of the trouble," Nancy said. "There would be no reason for them to hold back on those other two things." "I still don't like Andy Jason," George said. "What about him?" "Well, I haven't ruled him out," Nancy said, "but he doesn't really seem to be trying to run Katie out of business. He seems to want to work with her. It doesn't make sense he'd try to hurt her like with the bike accident." After dinner, they all boarded the Ripper for the cruise back to Katie's. "So you heard all about our day," Nancy said to George, joining her on the banquette. "How was yours? How'd the workout go?" "Pretty well, actually," George said. "Katie and Jenna treat it like a war, though. Kind of takes some of the fun out of it." "They're fierce competitors," Nancy observed. "That's what makes them champions." "Yeah, and Katie told me some of the stuff that explains why they go at each other so hard," George said, lowering her voice. "They've kind of got a history together. Jenna was a regular world team member until Katie came along. Katie was so good that she moved into Jenna's place on the team, and Jenna became the alternate. So Jenna's trying to get back her place on the team, and Katie's trying to hold on to her place," Nancy concluded. "No wonder their workouts are so tough. I'm amazed they even speak to each other." "Katie says the team comes first," George said. "That's why she invited Jenna down. It will help them get along better and keep the peace." When they got back to land, they made their usual date for breakfast at Katie's and then hit their beds. Bess fell asleep immediately, but Nancy's thoughts kept her awake. She was happy about solving the mystery of the baby whale, but she still had work to do. "I'd promised I'd help Katie," she told herself, "and I'm going to." After hours of tossing and turning, she finally fell asleep. Nancy awoke the next morning with a jolt. Her mind was racing. She remembered the beginning of the note that was waiting for her when she and Bess got home the night of Bess's accident. "So sorry your friend got hurt. There's only one person who could have known about Bess's injury and been able to put a note under this door before we got home," she mumbled. "I've got to talk to Katie." She pulled on jeans and a lightweight yellow jacket. Then she wrote a note for Bess telling her where she was going. She ran the mile to Katie's house, but when she got there, no one was home. George runs in the morning. They're probably all out on the bluff. She let herself in with the key Katie had lent her. She ran straight to Katie's office and rummaged through the drawers until she found a phone book. Then she dialed the phone company customer service representative. "Hello, this is Katie Firestone," Nancy said. "I forgot to record a long-distance call I made yesterday. Could you please give me the number?" She wrote the number down and dialed it immediately. It rang twice, then someone answered. "Good morning," the voice said. "Malone Motel." Motel. I said that weird. That's the end of chapter 15. Let's see. Purple silk jumpsuit, classic apparel. I hope your organization goes well, Mecca. "Miss Firestone tires me," said Joan, smiling at her pun. "Very well, I'll pointlessly tell you everything for no reason." "You'll get tickets, Caden." The monologue. "See, Joan, you should have just shot her or paid attention to her moving across the room." "Now grab the gun, Nancy." The man heard the noise and opened fire on Ned and Bess. Oh, that'd be terrible. She actually did it. It annoys me how often the hero just leaves the gun and the bad guy gets a hold of it. If you don't use it, fine, but put it in a trash can and sit on it or something. That's very true. Keep it away from the bad people, please. Yeah, I hear that. We have one more chapter. So, wait a second, I'm confused. So, Katie called the Malone Motel. So did Katie hurt Bess? Who knows? Okay. Let's read the last chapter and find out. Chapter 16. Blow Up on the Bluff. "Is anyone there?" said the voice on the other end of the phone. "This is the Malone Motel." In her mind's eye, Nancy saw the scrap of business card she found on Katie's vandalized boat. Malone Motel fit perfectly. Yes, Nancy said, thinking fast. "This is Jenna Deblin. I was there earlier this week?" "Yes, Miss Deblin," the voice said. "I talked to you yesterday about your stay with us on Sunday night. You were asking about a sea kayak helmet, I believe." "That's correct," Nancy said. She was so excited she had to concentrate on making her voice calm. "We tried to call you," the voice said. "We did find your helmet after all. Would you like us to send it to you or hold it for your return visit with us?" "Hold on to it," Nancy said. "About how many miles are you from Seabreak?" she asked. "Let me see," the voice said. "Why, I'd say 200 miles at the most." "Thank you," Nancy said. As Nancy was hanging up the phone, George burst through the door. "Hey, you're early," George said, panting from her run. "Where are Bess and Ned?" She looked at Nancy. "What is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Where are Katie and Jenna?" Nancy asked. "They're probably on the bluff out by Katie's boat. There's a nice jogging trail out there." "Come on, George," Nancy said, racing for the garage. "We've got to find them." Nancy and George grabbed a couple of bikes and headed out along the shore from Katie's house. After about 20 minutes, they finally saw two figures up ahead jogging on the trail. Even from a distance, Nancy recognized immediately the tall, long-limbed form of Katie and the smaller, lithe body of Jenna. "There they are," George said, pointing ahead. Nancy nodded and pedaled faster. As she watched, Katie and Jenna stopped jogging. Katie leaned over and stretched a little, then she sank down onto the golden grass and leaned back on her hands, looking up at the sky. "Katie!" Nancy yelled as loud as she could against the sea breeze, but Katie didn't seem to hear. "Jenna!" Nancy yelled again. While Nancy and George watched, Jenna walked a little farther away, then leaned down and seemed to pick something up. Then she walked in from the bluff's edge a little until she was out of Katie's line of vision. Nancy could still see her, but she could also see the large cypress branch she held in her hand. Nancy pedaled faster and faster. Her heart was in her throat and she felt as if her lungs would burst. "Katie!" Nancy yelled again. Then George seemed to realize what was happening and yelled for her friend too. Katie seemed to be totally oblivious. She looked as if she were deep in thought as she rested on the bluff. In horror, Nancy watched as Jenna crept behind Katie and lifted the large hunk of gray cypress high over Katie's head. "Katie!" Nancy screamed with all of her strength, and this time it worked. Katie sat straighter and looked around. She saw Jenna just in time to duck. When Jenna saw Nancy and George approaching, she looked frantically around and then began running away. The trail was only her escape, but it was hopeless. The trail was her only escape, but it was hopeless. Nancy and George whizzed right by Katie and caught up with Jenna, who slowed to a walk and stopped. Then she dropped to her knees in a dejected heap on the trail and gave in to desperate, draining sobs. Nancy and George got off their bikes as Katie ran up to join them. "Jenna!" Katie said. "What were you doing? What on earth are you thinking?" She wasn't thinking about anything but herself, Nancy explained, and her past glory on the sea kayak team. "She's been jealous of you for a long time," George added. "You knew that, Katie." "Yes, but I didn't think she'd go this far," Katie said. She looked a little dazed. "When did you really get to sea break, Jenna?" Nancy said. "And by the way, I talked to the Malone Motel this morning. I already know the answer." Jenna looked as if she was going to try to run away again, but finally her shoulders dropped. Between spurts of anger and hysterical sobs, she spoke. "Monday," she confessed. "I got into the area on Monday." "But you didn't come to my place until Tuesday," Katie said. "I don't get it. Where were you?" "I slept in my car on a beach down the coast a couple of miles," Jenna said. "But why?" Katie asked. She still seemed in shock. "So she could wreck your boat," Nancy pointed out. "Right, Jenna?" Jenna nodded. "I watched you," she told Katie. "You were so busy getting ready for Nancy and the others you didn't even notice. And in the middle of the night Monday I went aboard the Ripper." "And ripped it," George said in a disgusted voice. "Same question," Katie said, her voice low and sad. "Why? Why would you want to ruin my business?" "It's only fair," Jenna lashed out. "You ruined me. You took away the only thing I ever wanted, a regular spot on the national team. I don't care about your silly old whale watching, but I figured if I disabled your boat, maybe you'd be too distracted to compete, or better yet, maybe you'd have an accident." Nancy got a chill when she saw the nasty look on Jenna's face. "How did you figure it out, Nancy?" Katie asked. "How did you know it was Jenna?" "I realized that Jenna was the only person who could have put the note under my door the night Bess fell off her bike, because she was the only one besides us who knew about the accident that quickly. She found out about it when we called you, Katie." "That's right," Katie said. "I told her right away." "So while we were down at the clinic, she was slipping the note under the door," George concluded. "You're also the one who cut the axle, didn't you?" Nancy asked Jenna. "Yes," Jenna hissed, "but it was Katie's bike. She was supposed to have the accident." Katie, George, and Nancy walked Jenna back to Katie's house. Ned and Bess were there. While George and Katie filled them in, Nancy called the sheriff. They all held Jenna until Sheriff Harvey picked her up. That evening, Nancy, Katie, George, Bess, and Ned fixed a celebration dinner of grilled tuna and homemade fries. "I've decided that if Jenna will agree to get counseling, I won't press charges," Katie said. "She needs serious help here, not prison. Besides, when the World Kayaking Organization hears about this, she'll be banned for life. And that will punish her more than anything," Bess said sadly. Ned laughed out loud as he helped himself to a third helping of fries. "What's so funny?" Bess asked. "I was just thinking about the first time we talked about taking this trip. I knew I'd like the kayaking, but I figured the rest of the time would be a big snooze. Was I ever wrong?" "You should have known better, Ned," George reminded him. "We all know that when we go on vacation with Nancy Drew, we're guaranteed a whale of a good time." End of chapter 16 and end of book. Let me catch up. Super delayed, but yay for the previous chapter. So it was Jenna. I, for some reason, thought that Katie had done the call, but then I remembered that Nancy had come in on the end of Jenna's call. No talent agent. Are you an agent of no talent? I must confess, the man has no talent. Rippin' the Ripper! I know. Did not realize I've been here that much. 65 hours. I just wanted to see my title. You followed me 5 months ago, A-Rox. Oh, are you talking about like hours into days? Jason was innocent in the book. Yep. It's a Dwayne Dwayne, I the power guy. I'm just making fun of your typo. Yeah. It's weird how her interactive, like, changes so much. Like, in the game, Jenna is not a kayaker, along with Katie, you know? So, like, it's all different. Look! Alright, guys. Well, that's another book finished. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate y'all. Next book I will be reading on stream will be, obviously, book number 12 of A Series of Unfortunate Events. This sucker thick, so those streams will be a good bit longer because I'm still going to try to break it up into thirds. So, obviously, the thirds will be quite long. And then after that, when we go back to Nancy Drew, we'll actually be reading The Secret of Shadow Ranch book, which is one of the classic Yellowbacks. So I'm excited to read one of the classic Yellowbacks on stream. Thick! Yeah. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the day. Please take care of yourselves. I hope this week ahead is great for you. I will be streaming definitely Wednesday. Maybe not tomorrow. Tomorrow night, Mom wants to do some things with me, but yesterday Mom had mentioned, she was like, oh, it would be really fun maybe if we did another episode of Guardians of the Galaxy tomorrow. So that might happen tomorrow. It kind of depends on, like, what my mom wants to do when she gets home from work. So very, very tentative. I'm not even going to, like, plan to say that that's going to happen. But anyway, take care of yourselves. I'll see you all. Much love. Have a great day. See you all soon. Thanks for being here. Bye.